Learning pods are an emerging trend in Canadian K 12 education, but what are they? Who is taking part in learning pods? Where are we seeing them pop up across the country? What role does government have to play? There's a lot of questions. My name is Paige McPherson, and I was recently hired by secondstreet.org to write a policy brief containing public opinion polling data on how Canadians are feeling about K 12 education in the wake of COVID 19. Now, Learning Pods fits into that, and that's why I'm here with Rachel Danziger Marmer, president of Learning Pods Canada, who's going to answer some of these questions for us and shed some light on the issue. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Paige. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and to try to empower parents and let them know about what Learning Pods is all about. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Our pleasure. So maybe let's just jump right in. Tell us, for somebody who's never heard of Learning Pods before, what are they?
Sure. So Learning Pods are, for me, in response to this unfortunate pandemic that we find ourselves in. Providing parents with opportunities to empower themselves and make decisions around their children's education that maybe don't fall in line with classical schooling methodologies right now. So there are a lot of ways a pod could look. Homeschooling family coming together to learn in small collectives, and so that's what it is. It's basically giving parents and students and teachers an opportunity to continue education outside of the classroom in response to the pandemic.
So this can take place in a home, or does it sometimes take place not inside of a home? Like, where are these learning pods happening?
Absolutely. I mean, if people have the space to accommodate a pod, a home is often ideal because there's little cost involved in, using your own space. Certainly, there are pods that were not able to use their own space or chose not to. So they could rent a space or repurpose an already existing space that they have, such as spin studio or whatever business they may have owned, and they are repurposing their space now in COVID because their businesses aren't operational. So that space can almost be repurposed. Churches and community spaces are also another great space to host a pod. Those are some of the main spaces. So homes, commercial spaces, and then community spaces, community centers and churches and things like that.
Right. So I know that learning pods have been particularly popular in Ontario, but have you seen them pop up across the rest of the country as well? Like, because you run Learning Pods Canada, you've been in contact with a lot of these families. So where have you seen this happening in the country?
Sure. I mean, when it started, we had when the group formed back in June or July, people were, joining from all over. We definitely Ontario is the predominant sort of grouping, but I feel like that's also because I'm in Ontario. But definitely we have Vancouver, BC is relatively popular. Quebec, there's quite a few families. And now I'm starting to see people from Saskatchewan and Manitoba kind of coming in more. So I'm trying to reach out to those families and create a dialogue. I like to try to get a feel for what's going on in their communities. And obviously lockdowns are in different phases, province to province, which affects things for people. So just, people all over. And I just try to kind of speak with them and get a sense for what's going on in their communities and how can learning pods help.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you about that, like how you connect with these families. And I know that Facebook has been a big part of that and social media for Learning Pods Canada. But I want to just start with how you made the choice for your family. How did you decide that, not being part of the traditional classroom, taking your kids into a learning pod environment was the right choice for your family?
Absolutely. And before I begin, I have to say it was not a choice that we made lightly as a family. We absolutely loved our school. It was a community. We were a part of that community. Our children loved it. So to leave that was not an easy choice for us at all. But we were really thinking into the future and looking at the past, from the start of the shutdown into the summer, and taking that information and looking forward and understanding that there was likely going to be sort of a lot of unpredictability for our family, for our children in the school system. the leadership at the time, like in August at the start of the school year, was not clear and decisive about what back to school would look like. The plan was never a plan that was shared with people, that was, discussed and even criticized and prodded and improved upon. And these things were red flags to me right from the jump. And being that I have 4 children and I had an infant at home and businesses to try to keep afloat, I just knew that another year of in and out of school was probably potentially going to destruct our family from the inside out. Like I just know, like having experienced distance learning and online learning, it was hard. There were tears in our family. There were breakdowns. There were meltdowns. My kids don't do the online learning very well. So even in person, they need quite a bit of, prompting and redirecting. So, that in person is so critical. So I knew that. I knew that I couldn't be the teacher that my children needed. And a distant teacher can't be a teacher that my children needed. So taking all that into account, that was sort of the initiation. And then as more information did become available around things like masking, I was concerned. I was very happy with the initial Sick Kids report that came out at the start of the summer, suggesting that children didn't need to distance and mask. And I was confident when I heard that data and that information. And then, that wasn't really applied in the school boards. So I was worried about that. I know my children struggle with the masking. So that was a big concern for both my children and other children as well. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the decisions. I just knew it was, I just knew in my heart that it was the right thing for us.
So once you made this decision, you then went forth and started Learning Pods Canada. And so how did that get started and how did you find others? I guess maybe starting with how you found others and found that this was something that other families were also interested in doing.
Absolutely. Well, I did a little bit of procrastinating, into the summer. And finally, like one day I was like, you know what, I got to pull the trigger. If we're not sending the kids, I've got to sort this out. So late August or even late July, I took to social media, put up a post in a local community group about my plan and asked others if they were interested in joining. And I got a lot more questions than responses, like, oh, tell me about what you're planning on doing. And then I started getting, messages from people like in Barrie and like in Nova Scotia being like, I have a child this age, let's meet. And I'm like, mm-hmm. I can't pod with all of you. So I started to realize like a lot of parents were in the same boat. They had the same questions. They had the same concerns. I realized we all need a solution. Like if I'm feeling this way, then, clearly, it's clear that many others are feeling the same way. So that was it. I was just like, got to get her done. It started with the group. So that I didn't have, pardon?
The Facebook group?
Yeah, it started with a Facebook group so that I wasn't trying to keep track of everyone through like messages, because that was starting to get very difficult to track everybody. And I'd never made a Facebook group before. I'm not like a big social media person, but I figured it would be helpful. And so I did it. And it just started to grow on its own. It was very organic.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm imagining that it would be tricky to do all of this on your own. You've mentioned to me that, you do have volunteers that are involved. How did you find those people to volunteer to help out with things? One of the things that you had mentioned to me when we chatted for the column that I wrote, which viewers can find at secondstreet.org, was that you now have developed an insurance scheme that people can, or a plan that people can opt into. So how did you find people to help with that and get those balls rolling?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, the group has been amazing. It's been a huge support for parents, but also for me in identifying what parents need, what works with podding, what doesn't work, what are some concerns. And so throughout the group's inception and growth, there were a lot of questions from, parents that were delving into the legislation, delving into all of it and saying, okay, well, what about this, and this, and coming to the group. And then I'd be like, those are great questions. Let me get them addressed. And many times people would just step up with solutions. And so in case with the insurance, a really wonderful mom in the group and advocate for pods saw that people were worried about this insurance piece, and she happens to be in insurance, so, and she's innovative in her own right within, and so she said, let's do this, let's figure this out, let's get this done. And it took a lot of months and a lot of hard work, and she did it all, by the goodness of her heart, and we got it done. And so very exciting.
So a lot of volunteers that have come out of the woodwork, which is very interesting. So what are some of the other reasons that you've heard, excuse me, from families that have begun engaging in learning pods, families who reached out to you? Like if you can just kind of quickly sort of go over some of the reasons that people are interested in learning pods, that you've heard of.
So there's really just, I believe, two sides of the camp, which is, there are families there are families who have children or families with immunocompromised individuals. And, they had to do a risk analysis of that, and sending their children to school knowing that there are vulnerable people in the home. So for those people, that was a decision to protect their loved ones. So that's a big one. And then on the other side are people sort of like myself, where it's a stability thing, or, not feeling comfortable with some of the, pardon?
Some of the new rules, like you had
some of the new rules, yes, for children and around socializing in schools and things of that nature. And I just quickly have to say that I really am quite concerned about some of those things, and so are many other parents. So a lot of research to show it's, could be concerning to be doing some of these things. It's quite unprecedented. So a lot of parents don't feel comfortable sort of being in that position for their children.
Right. So immunocompromised family members or students, you've got people who are concerned about interrupted learning and wanting the stability. And then you've got people who are, have more concerns about maybe the mental health impacts on children because of some of the new rules and getting children to abide by those.
Absolutely. And just one more thing, if I may, is that children who were already struggling in school or children with special needs, I think parents are very concerned about how their needs can be met now in this new classroom, where teachers are quite clearly stressed, right? There's a lot of newness, and there's a lot of new responsibility on teachers, and a lot of newness to navigate with, learning online and in person in one room, and all of the disinfecting and cleaning that they have to do. And so, children that were already sort of falling behind, there's a lot more risk for that now. And parents are concerned about that as well. And that is a really big, big piece. And that was a concern pre-COVID. And so that is all the more so a concern for these parents now. So that's a really big one as well.
Right. And we did see some information coming out of Alberta as an example that kids are quite behind this school year. So So here's some of those concerns. Now, of course, learning pods do not come without sacrifice, financial sacrifice for parents. In some cases, it would involve a parent having to not work when maybe they were working before, if they were going to be the primary facilitator of the pod or serving as the teacher. In other cases, there are obvious costs. So can you just give us sort of just a quick ballpark of what kind of costs families could be facing if they want to engage in a learning pod?
Sure. I mean, I just want to preface by saying free is totally an option. And if there are families that want to explore this avenue and money is a constraint, then I welcome those people to reach out to me personally. And I'd love to find ways to get creative and help figure that out. And there are ways. Typically a pod, if you're hiring a facilitator, so that is the main bulk of the fee. And that ranges depending on the facilitator, because they get to set their own rates. And it's really dependent on what the facilitator charges, and that depends on what they bring to the table with their experience, their credentials, and also, are they planning the whole curriculum, or is that a shared responsibility? Are they purchasing something? So there are a lot of factors that depend on what a pod could look like and what it will cost. So the facilitator is the first cost. And again, that would be divided by all the members in the pod. So if there are 4 families, then the cost of the facilitator could be divided 4 ways. Sometimes parents are teaching and all the parents agree and they opt for that, and that could be free. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're renting a space, there could be a cost for that. That could be anywhere from $5 to $15 per day per student. And again, that depends on the hosting space. That's not regulated by myself or any governing body. It is, it's private enterprise. And I guess, anything above that would be, curriculums or supplies and things of that nature. I know the government is giving people a little bit of money at least in Ontario, for things like supplies and schooling. So that money could be great to help supplement the pot as well for things like supplies and things.
So in Ontario, in particular, there is a piece of red tape that we've discussed for a different column you can find at secondstreet.org as well, that talks about, or rather you can find it in the report on secondstreet.org, that talks about a piece of red tape in Ontario that, if it was relaxed, could make learning pods more affordable for families. Can you shed a little bit of light briefly on that?
Sure. So in the Private School Act, it states that 5 or more children, school-age children learning during school hours and learning school subjects, must form a private school. The cutoff for that was early September. And so that's got a lot of people asking questions. There's some other acts also that could come into play. So there's several acts that need to sort of be juggled and pieced together to make sense of what's allowed and what's not allowed. We're operating under the premise that 4 children or less is allowed. Because it's less than 5, which is what the private school legislation states. So, obviously during a global pandemic, and we've seen the numbers, that throngs of children by the thousands are leaving the school board and they're unaccounted for. So we know these children are at home, and we know the importance of socialization with children. So I've asked our leaders on numerous occasions to take a stance and cut the red tape, as I like to say, around this what I think is a menial number of 5 right now in this global pandemic, so that parents don't worry that they're breaking the law, or that they can do this in a way that's safe and also legal, because that's important to people. And it's also more affordable when you can divide the cost of the facilitator by more families. So that's a little piece of legislation there that we were discussing.
Right. So there might be other cases as well, maybe in different provinces, where red tape might be something that could be restricting learning pods from taking off. And so that certainly is perhaps something that governments could look into if interested. So I just have one more question for you, and that's about next steps. We're in the second wave of COVID-19 now. How are learning pods doing, and what do you see as the next steps in this area?
Great. Thanks for asking. Well, I've been working really hard at designing a platform for parents, because as great as social media is, it is, it's not really the space for what parents need. So I'm working on creating something where parents can come on and find each other and find everything they need to get their potting done. And it's not even just for potting. If you're a homeschooling family and you're just looking for local buddies, it's a great space for that as well. So my hope is just to, get the word out there, introduce more families to this concept, empower them with the knowledge that there are options, present them with those options, and continue to solve pain points for people and solve the problems that make this difficult and challenging. And I'd love to see it grow. So that's where I'm at with that.
Well, it's certainly an interesting new area in K-12 education in Canada, something that we are seeing has a growth in interest. So it's definitely something for Canadians to keep an eye on. And Rachel, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing this information with us. Anyone who is interested, of course, can go to secondstreet.org to read the report and the column and find out more.
Thanks, Paige. It was lovely to see you.